Your mother was hiding something. When he followed her, he discovered a secret that would change everything. Mark always knew that life brings challenges. But now, things are different. There are secrets he can't unravel, changes he can't control, and choices that could change everything. When the path ahead becomes uncertain, how far will he go to protect what he loves? Mark was hunched over the engine of an old car, his hands greasy, while the familiar smell of oil filled the stifling air of the small workshop in his backyard. The afternoon sun beat down on the back of his neck, but he didn't mind. Fixing cars kept him focused, pushing away the disturbing thoughts that came with uncertainty about the future. He had always known that life as a mechanic would be tough, but he hadn't expected the weight of responsibility to fall so soon on his shoulders. Every move he made, every part he adjusted, was a reminder of his father, Tom. A former race car driver, Tom had taught Mark everything. Those hours in the workshop connected them deeply. Mark remembered the afternoons spent there, watching his father work while he played with the smaller tools. The accident that ended Tom's career still haunted both of them. The image of the car skidding on the track and the deafening sound of the crash never left Mark's mind, even after so many years. Now, at 20, he carried his father's legacy as both a burden and an inspiration. He wanted to live up to the family name, but he also knew that the most important thing right now was to ensure his mother, Clara, was safe. Her health was deteriorating, and he knew that time was a commodity they couldn't waste. Clara, an admirably strong woman, had worked as a housekeeper ever since Tom was forced to leave the tracks. She did her best to support the household, but each cough, each slower step, showed how exhausted her body was. One night, as Mark finished repairing a car, Clara walked into the workshop. She wore a coat more elegant than usual, something that didn't go unnoticed. Her smile was affectionate, but her tired eyes couldn't hide her fragility. "Mom, are you okay?" Mark asked, concerned, stopping what he was doing to look at her. He wiped his greasy hands on an old rag, his eyes fixed on her face. Clara hesitated for a moment before smiling again. "I'm fine, dear," she replied, coughing slightly. "Just a silly cold. I'm heading out for another job, but I'll be back soon." "A job? At this hour?" Mark frowned. It was late, and she didn't usually go out this late, especially not in such fancy clothes. "Are you sure you're taking care of yourself?" Clara let out a short laugh, trying to brush off her son's worries. "You worry too much, Mark. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about this." He nodded, but something felt off. His mother had been going out more frequently in recent weeks, always late, and always dressed in ways that didn't match her routine. Something inside him told him there was more to the story, but he didn't want to push her. She already carries enough, he thought, returning to his work, though his thoughts kept drifting. Why won't she tell me everything? Mark knew he couldn't ignore this for much longer. The responsibilities weighed on him, just like the engine he had just adjusted. "I need a way to earn more money," he thought as he closed the car's hood. With each passing day, he felt time slipping away, both for his mother and for the future he dreamed of achieving. It was almost midnight when Mark saw Clara leaving through the door, once again dressed in her finest clothes. For weeks, he had noticed this unusual behavior, but that night, his concern overflowed. Something was wrong, and he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He grabbed his jacket, turned off the workshop lights, and with his heart racing, decided to follow his mother. The neighborhood streets were quiet, only the sound of Clara's and his footsteps echoed in the distance. Keeping a safe distance, Mark watched his mother's determined steps. Each step she took seemed to pull her further away from him, and he felt the knot in his stomach tighten more and more. After about 20 minutes, Clara entered an area of the city that Mark rarely visited. It was a wealthy part, full of mansions surrounded by high walls and ornate iron gates. "Is she working here?" Mark thought, confused. He followed her to a massive mansion, where she discreetly entered through a side gate, clearly known to the owners. Mark approached, staying in the shadows, until he found an open window on the side of the house. Curious, he moved closer, trying to hear the conversation. "The treatment is too expensive," said a male voice. "But it's her only chance." She needs it as soon as possible. Mark felt his stomach churn. Treatment? Her only chance? He tried to focus to hear more, but the voices drifted away. She's sick and didn't tell me? He thought, panic starting to take over his mind. He moved away, still trying to process everything he had heard. Mark returned home that night with a weight in his chest that seemed unbearable. Lying in his bed, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The image of his mother leaving at night, the expensive treatment, the possibility that she was hiding something so serious, it all haunted him. Why didn't she tell me? He repeated to himself. He knew he would have to confront her, but the fear of what he would discover paralyzed him. He feared that, by opening that door, there would be no turning back. The sun had barely risen when Mark got out of bed, his thoughts still consuming him. He found Clara in the kitchen, making breakfast as she did every day. Even in that daily routine, he knew that something was different. He needed to confront her. It was the only way to find out the truth. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice deeper than he intended. Clara stopped stirring the coffee and looked at him, surprised by his serious tone. The smile she always wore wavered. "What's wrong, my son?" The concern in her voice was evident, but she tried to remain calm. Mark took a deep breath, gathering the courage for what was to come. "I followed you last night," he began, the words heavy in his mouth. "I saw you going to that house. I heard about the treatment. Are you sick, Mom? Why didn't you tell me?" The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Clara averted her gaze, her trembling hands resting on the table. Mark watched every detail, every small movement that revealed how nervous she was. He knew something was wrong, and confirmation would come soon. I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't want to worry you even more, but I guess I can't hide it from you anymore." Mark felt his heart tighten. He was about to discover something that would change everything. "Yes, I'm sick, Mark. It's not just exhaustion, it's not just the work. It's something more serious, and I need an expensive treatment, a treatment I can't afford on my own." Mark blinked, stunned. Although he had suspected, hearing it from his mother's mouth was a heavy blow. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped." The pain in his voice was palpable. Clara looked at him, tears filling her eyes. "Because you already do so much, Mark. You sacrifice so much for me, for our family. I didn't want to be another burden for you." Mark felt tears burning his eyes, but he forced himself to keep them in check. He needed answers. "And that house? What were you doing there?" The frustration was evident. Clara sighed, defeated. "The man you heard, he's your father's former team manager. He found out about my condition and offered to help. He wants to pay for my treatment, but there's a condition." Mark frowned, confused. "A condition? What condition?" "He wants you to work for his team, as a mechanic. He believes in your talent, just like he believed in your father's. But if you accept, you'll have to leave for 6 months. Stay with the team, traveling. Away from me." Mark felt the ground open beneath his feet. The offer was tempting, but the price. How could he leave his mother, especially now that he knew the severity of her condition? "I don't know what to do," he said, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier. Clara took his hand, looking into his eyes with an expression of love and sacrifice. "Whatever you decide, Mark, I'll support you. But remember, this is your chance. It's not just for me, it's for your future too." Mark knew he had to make a decision, and time was against him. In the days that followed, Mark was more introspective than ever. He spent hours in the workshop, adjusting engines, fixing cars, but his mind was miles away. The dilemma his mother had placed before him was enormous. He knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but the price seemed too high. How could he leave his mother alone, knowing she needed him? But at the same time, how could he ignore the chance to fulfill a dream while also securing her treatment? As he worked in the workshop, memories of his father flooded his mind. Mark remembered how Tom spoke about racing with a sparkle in his eyes, about the thrill of being on the track, about the feeling of freedom. His father had always told him that the talent for working with cars ran in his blood, that one day he'd have his own chance to shine. One night, while he was adjusting a car engine, Clara appeared in the workshop again. She looked more tired than before, but still with that gentle smile that Mark loved so much. "Mark," she began, her voice weak, "I know you're struggling with this decision, and I don't want you to think you have to do it just for me." Mark stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "I know, Mom," he said with a sigh, "but how can I leave you here? What if something happens while I'm gone?" Clara smiled tenderly, reaching out to touch her son's arm. "I've lived a long life, my son. What matters to me now is seeing you achieve your dreams, seeing you go beyond what your father accomplished. He would be so proud of you, just like I am." Mark felt tears welling up in his eyes. He knew she was right, but still, the fear of losing her consumed him. "I'm going to accept the offer," he finally said. "I'll do it for you, Mom. And for myself." Clara smiled, tears filling her eyes. "I knew you'd make the right decision, my dear." Mark left with the racing team shortly afterward. Saying goodbye to his mother was painful, but he knew he was doing the right thing. The work with the team was intense, and each day brought new challenges. But Mark threw himself into the opportunity, determined to honor his father's legacy and ensure his mother received the treatment she needed. The team welcomed him with respect. He quickly gained the trust of the veterans, who saw in him not just Tom's son, but a talented mechanic in his own right. Mark felt the pressure of the job, but at the same time, it was the life he had always dreamed of. Adjusting race cars, feeling the adrenaline in the air, it was as if he was finally in the place he was meant to be. As the season progressed, the team began to prepare for the most important race of the year. It was a decisive race, not only for the championship but also for the survival of the team. Sponsorships were on the line, and everyone knew it. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the team's drivers was late for the race, and no one could locate him. The team manager, in a panic, looked at Mark with an expression he would never forget. "Mark, you're gonna have to drive. You're the only one who can do this." Mark froze. He had never raced professionally. It was madness to put him in a car at such a crucial time in the championship. But then he thought of his father, of the stories, the lessons, the love Tom had for racing. He couldn't waste this chance. With his heart pounding, he put on the racing suit and got into the car. The roar of the engines surrounded him, and he felt a wave of adrenaline surge through his body. When the starting flag was raised, Mark hit the accelerator, more focused than he had ever been. The race was an experience Mark would never forget. Every turn was a battle, and the pressure was immense. The drivers around him were veterans, people who had been in this life for years, and Mark was a rookie. But something drove him forward, the desire to honor his father, to secure his mother's future, and to prove to himself that he belonged in this world. His father's words echoed in his mind as he sped up, adjusting to the speed and intensity of the race. "Don't look back, Mark. Focus on what's ahead." And that's what he did. Lap after lap, he stayed focused. He felt the car respond to every move, as if they were one. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, and for a moment, he forgot everything. His mother's illness, the debts, the hardships. He was there on the track doing what he was born to do. When the race ended, Mark crossed the finish line in 7th place. It wasn't a top position, but for him it was a victory. He had pushed his own limits and ensured the team's survival. Back home, Mark was greeted by Clara with a tight hug and tears in her eyes. "I knew you could do it, my son," she said, holding him close. Mark smiled, feeling the weight of the past weeks finally lift. He had done what needed to be done. The race, his father's legacy, his mother's safety, everything made sense now. A few months later, Clara completed her treatment, and her health was visibly better. The workshop that Mark had left behind for a while was now more than just a workspace. It was a symbol of everything he had achieved. Clara watched him with pride as he adjusted another engine, and for a moment, she allowed herself to dream of a future where hardships were just distant memories. "Are you ready for the next race?" she asked with a smile. Mark looked at her and smiled back. "More than ever, Mom." more than ever.